Welcome, everybody. Welcome all our Torah Anytime viewers. So tonight I'm going to try, the goal is to try to get the whole Chanukah story into the time that we have allotted for today. And you might think, Chanukah story, you hear the Chanukah story, you're like, okay, there was a fight, there was Maccabees, pretty strong Israeli men with swords and spears, and they won the Greeks, and then they found an extra jar of oil, and they lit the jar of oil, and, we eat donuts, and spin the dreidel, and, light the menorah. But in fact, the story is very long, very interesting, and there's a lot of things. The reason why I called it the hidden story of Chanukah is because most people don't know the story of Chanukah, which also makes you wonder, why doesn't anybody know the story of Chanukah? And in fact, there's no books on Chanukah. And there's Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, which is actually a book, not just Israeli soccer team or something like that. So we need to understand this. First of all, if there is a book called the Maccabees, then how come we don't have we have in Megillat Esther? When we come to Purim, we read the Megillat Esther. We read the whole story of Esther. We don't read the story by Chanukah. So how come we don't do that? Number two, it's very interesting because this is the last festival since this is the last festival in history until today, which means we had Pesach, you had then you have Shavuot, you have Sukkot, you have all those holidays in a chronological order. Chanukah happened the last one in the time zone. So now this is also brings us to a very important understanding. There's a saying that Ezo Chacham ha'oret hanolad. Who is someone who's wise? Someone who sees the future. Someone who sees what's going to happen. Also, somebody who's smart is somebody who's able to learn from other people's mistake. Or you look through history and you realize what happened through history, and you realize, okay, let me learn from how they messed up. So this is what the non-Jews never got that. The people that prosecuted the Jews, it was always like they didn't get the hint. Paro tried to destroy us, didn't work. They didn't read that. Then they go and you keep on going through history. You have Persia. You have the Greeks. You have the Babylonians. Keep on coming. They keep on trying to destroy us, and we're still around. But no one learns, and they keep on trying. Now we have Hamas, we have ISIS, we have a bunch of other friendly neighbors in Israel that also want us to be eradicated from the face of the earth. And the other thing is, and to this I don't really have an answer. The number one most celebrated holiday for the secular Jews is Chanukah. What you think about it, okay, it's nice, you get to sit around the kid, 8 nights of presents, whatever. But if you read the story and you know the story, they're the last people that should celebrate this holiday.
Oh.
How?
No, I got it.
Oh, okay. I'm going to hear weird things today. All right. So there's also a few, we're still in the introduction. Also, there's an oral tradition, whenever that you see Greeks in the Gemara, in the thing, it's actually referring to Hellenistic Jews. So we have to define the term Hellenistic or Hellenism. Hellenistic is when you have the Jews wanted to be like the Greeks. The Greeks were, the side of, impurity, and the Jews who wanted to be like the Greeks, acted like the Greeks, behaved like the Greeks, they were called the Hellenistic Jews. So it says, whenever it actually says in the Torah Greeks in the oral law, it's actually referring to the Hellenistic Jews. Okay, so that is the introduction. Now let's begin with so what happened. So to begin, I want to start off with beforehand. For some people, I get this question all the time. What happened first, Purim or Chanukah? All the time. So it's a very common question. So let's get the chronological order, so it'll be very, very clear. You had the first temple when it was standing. It was destroyed by the nation of Babylon, Bavel. Now, when they were destroyed, and Babylon was like the ruling empire, if you may. After that came the ruling empire, Persia. Persia is where you had the story of Purim. And that was the 70-year gap between the first Bet HaMikdash and the second Bet HaMikdash. So the second Bet HaMikdash was built under Persian rule. It was in fact the son, which was King Darius II, I believe it was, who was the son of Esther and Ahasuerus. He was the one who started with the building of the second temple.
But that was Shlomo.
That was the first temple.
Oh.
Yeah. Then we started off with Babylon. Then we went to Greece, being the majority stakeholder of the world, and then you have Greek, which is going to be our story, and then it's going to end with Rome. Rome is the destruction of the second Bet HaMikdash. Clear? Make sense? Okay. So, in fact, I'm sorry. You're going to hear a lot of the. It's automatic. It's like the pinky that comes out. Yeah. It's perfect. Yeah. It just burns my tongue, so I take a little bit, I do that, and then I'm good. Okay, so now when the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the Jews thought that, okay, God forsake us. It's not like we're like, oh yeah, God doesn't like us. This is the first time that it happened, that God was like, okay, the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the Jews were exiled, the Jews thought, okay, we're done, that's it. So they said, let's just assimilate. Let's just, go marry, go into marry and do whatever, until the prophet Yechezkel came and says, no. He says, this is because you sinned and you went away, you didn't do, if you're going to go and do tshuva, then God's going to take you back. So that was you had the story of Persia, which is Purim, and then you have the story with Greeks. Now, before we even start with the actual Greece, which you have with the famous Antiochus, we have to start with somebody who's very famous in the Greek history, is Alexander the Great, right, from Macedonia. Macedonian? Alexander the Macedonia, right? Okay, so it's very interesting when you read about the Greek history. It's very, very confusing of what's actually going on in their in the Greek culture, because you have on one side they were very sophisticated, they were extremely advanced in science and medicine, and in fact I'm sure you guys have heard of Socrates, very famous philosopher, Greek. You know who was a student? Plato. Plato was a student, and people don't usually know this. Plato was actually a wrestler. He won like 2 gold medals. And whatever they considered the equivalent of gold medals back then, and then he went to philosophy. He actually believed in the immorality of the soul, which is surprising. What did I say?
It's okay.
Whatever. As long as you understood it, I'm fine. Okay.
I heard that also. It's okay.
Like I said, I'm on a lot of medication today, so words are going to come out that I won't understand it. I hope you understand it, but please stop me if I don't make sense. The next, after Plato, came Aristotle. Aristotle was, one of his famous teachings was happiness is the goal of life, which I think he's pretty right on, because that's the way most people live their life, is happiness is the goal of life. And what people don't know is that he had a student, Aristotle, and his student was Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was actually a philosopher. He actually studied philosophy, and he died at a very young age of 33, I believe it was. So he didn't live that long, but he conquered the entire, that's when he put Greece on the map. Like beforehand, Greece were they were fighting with each other. All the islands were against each other. When Alexander the Great came, he conquered everything. He took it over from Persia. So when you look at the Greek the Greek lifestyle, it was completely different than because they had the regular paganism. So you had all the gods and all the regular stuff that was going on at that time, but they had something more advanced, which was philosophy. They had the philosophy and the science and the medicine and all these things, but they, on the other hand, also they were very, very barbaric people. There was no even though they believed they had paganism and they had gods, they didn't believe that the gods actually cared about them. It was sort of like they created the world or whatever powers that they say that they had, but they sort of just let them be as they want. So this created an okay for them to do whatever they want. They in fact had a thing that there was no such thing as forbidden love. You can be married, you cannot be married, doesn't matter, everything's good. And their main goal was pleasure. And they also very much worship the body. You ever hear people, the body is my temple, It's usually not such a deep voice. The body is my temple, That usually and where does it come from? Usually it comes from a Greek. Greek worships their bodies. Now granted, you have to treat your body the right way. You have to, be healthy. But where they actually worship their body, and that's why they were also very into nudity, which is, odd, but they were they used to have gymnasiums, and they used to wrestle, and they used to, all in nude. Men, women, doesn't matter, all in the nude. So, they, even though they had this, advanced culture on one end, they were a little bit crazy on the other end with this barbarism. Now, with all this advancements that they had, there was no, in fact, I don't think there's a Greek word for morally reprehensible. Maybe now, but back then there was no word for it, which means is they didn't believe in a higher power. It was just do what you want, feel what you want, all instant gratification. It's all about the pleasure right here, right now. So, besides the fact that if let's say they captured a country or a city or whatever, there was no mercy to the women or children as normal people would do it. They were extremely barbaric. The only people who upped them in the barbarism, if that's a real word, is the Romans. They're the ones who upped them in their game. Now, until this time, in the Jewish history, by the way, the way that we're going to go to understand this story is we're going to go to the Greek side, the Greek story, and then we're going to jump to the Jewish, what's going on in the Jewish world, the Greek world. So you're sort of going to get simultaneously 2 different pictures, but it will all meet up. So the Greeks originally thought of the Jews as and how many people now is weird people with weird customs. Okay, sorry, I tried. So they thought of them as weird. Like, what are they doing? Why are they putting these things on their hands? Why do they, they're just weird people. Until something came, there was a King Ptolemy. There was something called the Septuagint. Septuagint is where he gathered 70 of the Chachamim, the sages, brought them into his palace, put them each into separate rooms, and told them translate the Torah. Why did he do that? He says, you put them all, they're going to say, okay, let's change this, let's change this. He wanted the unadulterated Torah. The miracle that happened is I believe they changed 13 things. And all 70 of them changed exactly the same 13 things. So, I think Rav Hutner says this. He says that's not a miracle. He called that a miracle. You know what's a miracle? You put 70 rabbis in the same room and they come out with the same Torah. That's a miracle. But in all being said, they took the Torah and now the Greeks had the Torah. This is the first time that it was translated in history, the Torah. So the Greeks now start reading the Torah, and now they're like, originally they thought the Jews as like crazy, weird people, but now they're like, okay, they're actually very sophisticated, very educated, very morally advanced, much more than they were. So it started like, beforehand it was just like the Jews, like the weirdos. It's like, let's say you're like, yeah. But like sometimes you have like, let's say you're doing a program. Let's say you're in a class and you have to, you're competing whatever for let me think of a better example. You're competing for a science project. And you're creating this thing, and then you have like this one weird kid, who's like, the glass is always falling eyes like 17 times, one of those like real, like you want to come see my spaceship, one of those type of kids. And originally you're like, okay, he's weird, but then when he starts opening up these like crazy textbooks and he knows what you're talking about, you're like, okay, he's going to be my competitor. So they saw Jews all of a sudden as like, okay, now they're standing on the map, now they mean something. So it was like sort of like a conflict brewing. Then when they read the Torah, they see like, the Jews have a purpose. They're spreading the one name of God throughout the entire world. And it sort of conflicts with the Greek purpose, which is spreading Hellenism or the Greek life throughout the entire world. So this is where it started to act, like, okay, we got to, they put them on the map, and like maybe we should be a little bit careful about them. Now on the Jewish side, what was going on in Israel, there was first of all we have to explain a few concepts. There's a concept of the Kohen Gadol, which obviously was the high priest, but more than that, during the time of the Second Temple, especially at the end, the high priests actually became Hellenized, which means they became like Greek. And the question is, how is that possible? They're most holy, and one of the reasons is that one of the jobs of the high priest was at this time the Jews were not self-governing; they were governed by other people, and this is really where the Greeks were the king. The rulership. So the taxes went through the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol went and then he, gave the taxes to the king. So the Kohen Gadol's family and the king's family had a relationship. So once you have a relationship with them, it sort of got, you get influenced by the people that you're around. So some Kohanim actually became Hellenized. They became very, very Greek-like. And the first Kohen Gadol of the Second Temple was Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik, he was like his name. He was really a righteous tzaddik, and there was a very interesting story about him in the Gemara. First of all, there were people called the Kutim, the Samaritans. The Samaritans, they were not such a fan of the Jews, and now it's questionable because I was reading up about them, and they say that there is some Samaritans in Israel who claim to be that they're Jewish. But in fact, if there's like a few hundred, there's like very little left. But if they want to actually marry, they actually have to convert. The rabbis actually make them convert. So I'm not sure exactly where they hold in their status, but they were definitely not pro the Jews. So and by the way, this is where we'll soon see probably the first instances of the self-hating Jews. And the story was that they went to Alexander the Great. And they said, can we destroy the temple? And Alexander wasn't too fond of the Jews at that time either at the beginning because they didn't really help him in his conquest from Persia. So he said, yeah, you got it. Just do whatever you want. So he was traveling with them to Jerusalem.
Did he like the Jews though?
He did, afterwards. We'll soon see. Yeah. Okay. Spoiler alert.
Sorry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he goes, as he's traveling to Jerusalem, and Shimon HaTzadik, the Kohen Gadol, hears about it. So he says, I'm going to go meet him, because he heard about the whole plan of what's going on. So of what the Samaritans, badmouth the Jews. So he goes, he dresses up in the Bigdei Kehuna, in the 8 clothes of the Kohen Gadol. He dressed it up and he walked to greet the Alexander the Great. When Alexander the Great saw him from the distance, he got off his horse and he bowed down to Shimon HaTzadik. So the Samaritans walking with him says, why you bow down to this Jew? And he's like, this is the Jew that you're talking about? He's like, this guy, he comes into my dream every night before I have a battle, and I know because of him I win the war. I see he comes like that in the Bigdei Kehuna. And so he stands up, Alexander, and he goes over to Shimon HaTzadik, the Kohen Gadol, and he says, "What brings you over here?" And he says, "I heard that that these idol worshippers have been telling you certain lies about the Jews." And he's like, "Which idol worships are you referring to?" And he's like, "The Samaritans that you have with you." So he says, "You know what? You take them, you do whatever you want to them. The power is in your hand." And then he went and Alexander the Great granted the Jews. He's granted Shimon. He says, "What do you want?" He says, "I'll give you everything. I know my success is because of you." And Shimon HaTzadik said, he said, number one, if during Shemitah, during the year that you can't use the land, he says no taxes. And he says, please, that we be able to practice Judaism, practice the laws. And Alexander granted it to them, not only in Israel, but any Jew living in any land had the right to worship whatever, to worship Judaism and follow to the path of the Torah. Now, when Alexander died at the age of 33, the whole empire went into turmoil. Alexander he sounds like he was like a womanizer. He possibly died from alcohol poisoning. He was like a very interesting character. And so what happened was he had generals, and generals sort of like split up his empire, and each became king of a different section. The person who became king of Judea was known as Ptolemy, and he was also a very interesting character. But let's leave him for now. We'll get back to him. Let's speak now a little bit about the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, which is the people of the Great Assembly. The people of the Great. It's going to sound like we're doing different parts, but it's all going to plug in together. The people of the Great Assembly was actually no longer in, but Shimon HaTzadik was the last one. The people of the Great Assembly were people who are prophets. They are the ones. Some of their accomplishments would be they formulated the prayers. So the prayers that we know them, they formulated it. They also, one of the most important things that they did is they abolished the desire for idol worship. You think of it now, like, you see like this, let's say the Hinduism with is that the Hinduism with all the arms? Whatever it is. You look at that fat little Buddha, right? Let's use that one. Right? People pray to this fat little Buddha, and you're looking at like, we think of it as like, they're crazy. Like you're praying to a fat little, guy who's crossed like that. It doesn't make any sense. And you think of idol worship as like idiotic. But back in the days, there was a temptation for idol worship. Just like you have there was a temptation for like for the other gender, you had a strong temptation for idol worship. And the problem was a lot of Jews were falling to this. A lot of Jews fell to the temptations of idol worship. So what the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah did is that they prayed that it should be abolished the temptation of idol worship. It just wasn't worth it anymore. Too many Jews were falling. Now what happened was once they abolished the desire for idol worship, they lost the power of prophecy. Prophecy ended at that point in time. So the general reason for it is that the world is always on a balance. So you ever realize that nowadays there's no real witchcraft. There's no wizardry, right? You can't go to the school of witchcraft and wizardry, and it doesn't exist now. In the olden days, it used to exist. Witchcraft was like a real thing, and they actually practiced magic. Now, but one of the reasons is that now you don't have it because everything is always on a parallel. You had prophets, so all of a sudden you had witches and wizards. So they'll be like, okay, because if let's say a prophet comes to you, you lose your free will. You're like, of course, like he's speaking to God and everything he says come true. It's like it's no test. But all of a sudden, if you're like, okay, well maybe he's a witch, maybe he's a wizard, maybe he's like, maybe he's doing something else. So now the balance of the free will comes into play. So once they abolished idol worship, they abolished also the temptation of. Once they also lost the prophecy. Now once they lost prophecy, that's when like things started happening. Yeah.
So you're saying like the bigger the test that they had, like the more potential there was to, let's say, for example, be able to sin is if you overcome that, the higher.
Mm-hmm. Always like that. For example, let's say somebody who has like a very big anger issue, that person has a stronger potential to go and climb above it. It goes for everything. It's sort of think of it is that the harder you throw the ball against the wall, the more it's going to fly back. So the more the temptation that you have, the more of chances it goes the other way around. Now, until this point in time, in Judaism, there's always machloket. In fact, if anybody asks you a question and you want to know what the safest answer to be, machloket, right? It's always an argument. Oh, who knows? There's probably some two rabbis argue about it. Now, until this point in time, there was never a machloket. There was never an argument. When we had prophecy, the Judaism, not the oral law, not the written law, not the traditions, nothing. There was no argument. Everybody agreed on everything. Only once we lost prophecy, that's when things started getting out of control. And this happened right at the beginning of the Second Temple, is when the prophecy stopped. So, and in fact, I think it was 2 generations or 3 generations after the abolishing when we lost prophecy, is when the Christianity was the founder of Christianity came to being. So like the things started happening out of that. I believe he was a student of Yeshua ben Prachia, but it's still questionable. There's very, very question. But even though, like, since we lost the prophecy, and it was a very strong decline, the Shimon HaTzadik, the first Kohen Gadol, he was able to get a very good grip on. He was able to make sure that people were very close to God and religious, and everything was very, very good while he was still alive. Once he died, it went down even worse. And in fact, until he was alive, they used to use the Shem HaMefulash. Now we say the God's name, we say it as Ado, and then we say Noi, or Nai. Back then, they actually used to pronounce it the way that it was written. Now we don't do it anymore. Especially the Kohanim, in the Birkat Kohanim, they used to do the Shem HaMefulash. Now we don't do it anymore. So, after Shimon HaTzadik, there was the tzaddik of the generation was Antogenos Ish Sochel, which, if anybody reads Pirkei Avot, you'll see that right in the beginning. He was a student of Shimon HaTzadik. Now, let's just come down the voices. Okay, so what happened was with Shimon HaTzadik was he said a saying, and his saying was, "Don't serve your master to get reward. Just serve your master without the need for getting reward." Now he has two students, Tzadok and Bethos, I guess is the English translation of Betusim. And they took it to understanding. He says, you know what our rabbi is saying? He says there's no reward. He was saying, it's much better to serve God without thinking about the reward. They took it as there is no reward. So they veered off, and this is where you have, the Tzedukim came from them. The Tzedukim are the ones that they don't, I believe they're still around, but they're almost like nil. They're they believe only in the written law. Don't believe in the oral law. So if you ever see them wearing tefillin, they'll wear tefillin all the way down here, as opposed to where it's supposed to be up here. Because they believe everything the way that it says in the Torah, and nothing else. So
there's still some of them living in Israel.
Could be. It's like reform, I see it. Reform is not going to be around that much longer because they're all intermarrying. Or they're just, they're marrying men to men, which means that they're not going to have any.
They're still practicing cult.
Yeah?
I remember seeing a video about them.
Very interesting.
They bring, something like they bring korban or something.
Oh, really? On which altar?
They make...
Oh, they have an altar? I wouldn't be surprised. Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's them, but
they had, but it's interesting. Whoever knows history or ever read a little bit, they're very familiar with Josephus. Josephus Flavius was his Roman name. So he wrote about the Tzedukim that they were just irreligious people. And it's not like they were, the reason why they did that is in fact, the Tzedukim, their purpose was self-gratification, just pursuit of this world. If you realize, it's going very, very similar to the Greek way of life. So they saw the world, if somebody doesn't want to be religious anymore, so it bothers them that there is a God and the Torah is real and the rabbis are right, because that means that they're living a wrong life, and that really bothers them. So they make excuses. That's why usually the people that I speak to that are atheists are completely not atheists. They're just using it as an excuse because it makes them feel better. If they don't know that, if they say the Torah is not legit, then they just okay, I can do whatever I want, and there's no punishment about it. So this was the same idea. The Tzedukim, they wanted to go through the Hellenistic way of life, but they were okay, but the Torah says you can't. You know what? Yeah, it's not so bad. We're only going to believe in the written Torah, not the oral Torah. So we're going now. We fast forward a few a generation later. After Shimon HaTzadik, there was a Kohen Gadol by the name of Chonyo. Chonyo the second, I think it was. And so one of the jobs was to collect taxes from the Jews and then bring it to the king. And for some reason, which I couldn't find out the reason. I think history is also unclear with it as to why he didn't collect taxes. He didn't collect taxes for a whole year. And the King Ptolemy, saw it as a rebellion of the Jews. So what he did was he went and he dispatched a whole army to go and basically take over and make sure that they pay. So when this came to the ears of the Jews, so they said, okay, let's try to appease them really quickly. So they gathered a lot of money, tried to go and make nice again. So there was a person, the nephew of the Kohen Gadol. His name was Joseph ben Tovia, or Joseph ben Tovia. He was not the greatest spiritual man in the bunch. And he decided this opportunity, he was a very charismatic man, and he said, listen, I'll go. I'll speak to the king. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. Bring me all your money. I'll give it to the king. So for some reason, the Kohen Gadol actually did trust him, and they gave him the money, and he went to the king. And it says over there about him that he ate at the king's table, and he had some very interesting stuff going on with an Egyptian actress going on when he was there. But what happened was, is that he borrowed money from the Samaritans, the not such good people. And the way that it used to be in the olden days is that there were people called tax collectors. Now, tax collectors, it was a business. You go to the king and you say, okay, how much are you going to get for taxes from this whatever area, this city? And the king says, I don't know, $50 million a year. So he says, okay, I'll give you $50 million a year, and now I have the right to collect taxes. And now anything in excess, I keep. And the king says, okay, no headache on me, I just get $50 million a year, and he's fine. So this is what this Yosef ben Tovia did. He bought the rights to collect taxes for the Jews in Judea, and after he made nice with the king and everything went fine, he came back and he was starting to collect taxes. He was nervous about it, so he came with the king. He came with about 3,000 soldiers from the king, and he goes to the first city that he went to was Ashkelon, which is on the border over there. And the people in Ashkelon, they saw and they heard what he did. They didn't want to let him in. So, very difficult, by the way, to talk with a candy in your mouth. So he goes and he captures 20 of the most prominent people of Ashkelon, and he hangs them. He kills them. This guy's a Jew. Killed 20 Jews for his business, if you may. And then he raised taxes like 7 times more than they used to pay. So he basically took it to a whole nother. This was an era known as the Muhsin. The Muhsin were the tax collectors. It wasn't just him. Eventually, it branched out. Good business people saw opportunity, and they preyed on the Jews. The Jews preyed on the Jews. This is also, if you read in history, this is where the position of Nasi, the prince, came into being, was from here. Because they saw the Kohen Gadol couldn't handle it, so they branched it out. But in any case, going back to what was going on in the Greek, so there was after Alexander, it was actually quite some time until the story of Chanukah came. Thank you. After Alexander, there was Antiochus III. Not the story of Antiochus of that. And he granted Jews the rights to practice a religion, and he actually gave money for temple offerings. He actually, provided some of that. And then after him came somebody by the name of Seleucus. Seleucus was a very interesting story happened in his time, that there was another Kohen Gadol that came into being, and he was very upset about the whole tax collector situation. So he decided he's going to start a whole organization, try to dismantle them, the entire corrupt system. So he goes and one of the big tax collectors saw that his business is in jeopardy. So a Jew went and he told the king that the Jews, he told basically the king on the Jews, he basically rattled, and he says, the Jews have so much money in the temple, they don't even need so much money, and you should use it for yourself, you should use it for your kingdom. And the king was like, oh yeah, why don't I have it? So they went and he actually sent troops to go and reclaim this money that could have been for the king. So meanwhile, the Jews sent, the religious Jews went and sent, please, we really don't have it. It's really, we do have extra money, you're right, but we're just holding it for the orphans and for the widows, and it's just for safekeeping. So the governor that was in charge of the army, they didn't go for it. He kept on going. He says, he tasted blood, and he went into there was a miracle happened. So they started praying. The Kohanim prayed. They offered korbanot, and when this General Heliodrus, he walked in. When he went into the temple, there was a very big miracle that happened. There was a sort of like a ghost-like appearance came of a man on a horse, and he rode very fast towards this general, knocked him on his feet, and then 2 people appeared to whip him, and it affected him so much that he was on his deathbed. So now the Jews saw it as, okay, God listened to their prayers. But at the same time, they're like, okay, now he's going to go back, and they're going to think, he's going to tell the king, and the king is going to think that we're rebelling against him. That's not going to be good for the Jews. So then they started praying for korbanot, for his refuah shlema. And they went and they prayed, and he actually became better. And when he became better, he goes to the king and he's like, listen, these guys, they got God on their side. I don't think it's worth it to stay away with them. As if that's not, that was not good enough. This Rasha, this tax collector, went back to the king and says, no, don't listen to them. He just got influenced by the he didn't see a miracle that happened. This is what money blinds you. He goes and says, oh, don't listen to them. He was influenced by the Kohanim. So again, now the Jews wanted to send another, back and forth, speaking to him. But at this time, Seleucus was assassinated. And the person who came into power after him was his brother, Antiochus IV, which is the Antiochus of the Purim story. So Antiochus was a very interesting character. He proclaimed himself good, like godlike, and that people should like worship him and.
He wouldn't go to the bathroom in front of anyone?
No, that was Paul. That was a different godlike person. So he actually also introduced the gladiatorial games. Gladiators. Thank you. It's not bad. Only 2 mistakes. So I'm pretty good. I'm happy so far. It's good odds for me so far. Baruch Hashem. So, but he, instead of thinking, people used to call him. It was the Greek name that he used was like Epiphanes or something like that, which was like godlike in Greece. But people switched it and they called him, like, they switched one letter, which really meant to be Antiochus, a crazy one. He was literally like, he was mental. He used to go, and like nudity was a big thing back then in Greece. So they used to have like nude dancers, for the king. He would go, strip down, and dance with them. The king while he's sitting over there. So they thought, he was a little bit crazy. And he came. This is where the transition of where it started getting really, really bad for the Jews. And in fact, it's very interesting because the king Antiochus, originally he had no interest in making the Jews Hellenistic. They were like, I don't care, I want power and I want money. And whatever you do, I don't care, it doesn't bother me. But the Hellenistic Jews kept on convincing him. He's like, no, we gotta make Israel like Greece. And they had to very, very, basically like modernize it. Greece wasn't modern, Jews were like the ancient. We gotta modernize everything, we gotta build stadiums, we gotta do all these things. And the Jews convinced the king to prosecute the Jews, which is ridiculous. It was the Hellenistic Jews. So,
the same by the Romans, no? Similar against Jews?
Well, yeah. Well,
it was, what was the combination of Greek and Roman and Jew? What was that?
Well, the Romans took over, they won.
Greece.
Yeah, after.
So that continued, right?
Mm-hmm. The Romans are the ones who destroyed the second Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so these were like the self-Jew haters. They like literally how. And by the way, soon you'll see the way that we're going on the story is that it's very similar to what's going on nowadays in Israel. And you'll see like this common like ground of what's going on. And in fact, that's how way it's been for the past since Chanukah. So with the pressure with the convincing arguments of the Hellenistic Jews, Antiochus started putting some he started about Jews are not allowed to keep the Torah anymore. They're not allowed to keep their laws. And in fact, what happened was afterwards is that when Antiochus came to power, there was a guy. So Chonia was the Kohen Gadol. He had his brother was a Hellenistic Jew, and his brother name was Jason. He called himself Jason, and he went and he bribed the king to make him Kohen Gadol. So the king accepted the bribe and made him Kohen Gadol. And now this Jason, he was Hellenistic and he wanted to make it more Greek. So he bribed the king again to make a gymnasium in Jerusalem. And they put a gymnasium in Jerusalem. And when you think of a gymnasium, it's not like it's like a gym. Okay, people do exercise. Exercise is good. What's wrong with exercise? It was a place where there was Greek gods, everywhere, and you would worship the gods. You would say, oh, thank you very much. You would worship the gods. You would worship you would offer sacrifices. Thank you. You would offer sacrifices to the gods. No, I thought it was like a whole pastor. No, there's more.
Yeah,
there's more. Joking. Thank you very much. Okay. No, this is good. So now he opened up this gymnasium right near the temple, and when you open up a nice mall, it'd be like, let me check it out, and people started checking it out, and so much so that the Kohanim started checking it out, and people went into this gymnasium, this temple, if you may, and so people slowly started becoming more Hellenized, and they started like the Greek way is not so bad, it's and Greek became more normal to the Jews. Now the Hellenistic Jews did not think that this Jason was Greek enough. They wanted to actually put Greek idol worship in the Beit HaMikdash. So they went and they disposed, after 3 years, they disposed of him as Kohen Gadol, and they put in another Kohen Gadol, which by the name of Menelaus. Now this guy Menelaus, according to the Maccabees, the Maccabee book, Maccabees number 2, they say he wasn't even a Kohen. He was not a Kohen, and he was acting as in place of a Kohen Gadol. Now he went and he took it to another level. Now we said before that they used to compete naked. So it's wrestling. They used to wrestle in the nude. So the Jews, let's say, would be wrestling against Greeks, it didn't look good because the Greeks were uncircumcised, the Jews were circumcised. So now it looked like, defect, because again, the Greek picture that the body is perfect, it's a temple, and why are you defecting the body? So some Jews went under a surgical procedure to reverse the circumcision, to make it look like they're uncircumcised. And that would happen under the Menelaus. This was started to happen. Now this is also when Menelaus, he actually took he needed money. So what did he do? He was the Kohen Gadol. He took the vessels of the Bet HaMikdash and he sold them to get money for whatever the things that he needed to do. So this is when people started getting, all right, you stepped over the balance. There's a difference when you're like, okay, you're just modern, and then you're like, you stepped over the line. And this is where and then it was started like a rebellion brewing. So, and in fact, the first person that rebelled was Chonya, the Kohen Gadol, who was, removed from his post, and Menelaus had him killed. This Jew had another Kohen Gadol killed because he was going against him. And then for the rebellion, he had to get a lot of army to quiet the rebellion down. So here, and this is when it started getting significantly worse. Antiochus actually made, I think within a span of 2 years, he came twice to Jerusalem. The first time, he maybe took some vessels, but but the second time he actually captured like 10,000 Jews, brought them into slavery, and he also, he decided that there's no more Judaism. This is like, he put his foot down, there's absolutely no more Judaism. There is no Shabbat, no more circumcision, no more nothing. And in fact, if you were caught with any books of the Torah, you were killed. So you couldn't do it. This is where we'll probably speak next week about the whole dreidels. I want to speak at one point in time the customs of the Jew. It's weird. Why are we spinning dreidels? Are we gambling? We're not supposed to be gambling. But it's very interesting. There's sources for why we do certain things. So and because of this, so a lot of Jews, as it if were leaning towards Hellenism, so they became more Hellenistic, and they actually started serving these Greek gods. Now, what's interesting is we just said earlier that there was no temptation to serve Greek gods. So what was there? Why were they serving it? And in fact, they weren't serving it because they wanted to or they had this desire to. They were serving it more because they wanted to be like their Greek friends. They're like, look, we're the same. The same idea with the reversing the circumcision. We're all the same. So under this time, you had Jews that listened to what Antiochus did, and then you had Jews who were like, no, we're keeping the Torah. And many Jews died. You had Jews that ran to the caves and they were burned in the caves. You had like it was a disaster. It was like pogroms. It was like this prosecution against the Jews and against the Jewish Torah. So during this time, if you look at the hell, there's one thing when you're evil and you're just doing bad things for yourself, which is, okay, you're dealing with yourself, you're a big sinner, but that you're forcing other people to sin. These Hellenistic Jews, not only did they wanted to become Greek-like, but they forced the other Jews to become more Greek, to become Greek like them. So now this is you can see there's like a feud brewing. This is, you could really say, like almost a civil war going on. You had the religious Jews, which is we're soon going to be led by the Maccabee, Yehuda Maccabee, or Mattatyahu Maccabee first, and the Hellenistic Jews. So there was something grown, and people don't really know about this when they learn about the Chanukah story. So when did the Maccabees come into power? What happened was it was getting worse and worse and worse, and suddenly it was so bad that the Greeks went, or the Hellenistic Jews, they went and they placed altars in every single town. And one of the Greek governors came into a certain town, placed the Greek altar, and he brought a pig. And he calls, and there was a certain, this town was called Modin. Modin is about 8.5 miles from Jerusalem. Mattatyahu ran from Jerusalem because it was taken over by Hellenistic Jews. Mattatyahu was a tzaddik, he was a Kohen, and he ran to this town and lived in this town, Modin. Now, when the governor came, he searched for the biggest, most popular rabbi in town, and that was Mattatyahu. So he goes over to Mattatyahu and says, "You're gonna offer this korban to this." He took a pig, and he says, "You're gonna offer it onto this altar." And he says, not a chance in the world. He says, I believe in God and one God only, and I will never do that. And back then, by the way, that meant death penalty when you said things like that. And so meanwhile, a Jew goes from the back, and he says, I'll do it. And he takes the pig, puts it on the altar, and slaughters it as a korban for the altar. Now Mattatyahu got so angry, he had the zeal, like of Pinchas, zealous, thank you, of Pinchas and Zimri, that he took a knife, I don't know where he got a sword, he killed the Jew, he killed the governor, he broke down the altar, and he sort of started a revolution. He destroyed everything, and he screamed, Mi Lashem Elai, who is for God, come with me. And a group of people came with him, and they lived in the mountains. This was I think the earliest known as the guerrilla warfare. What they did and this is where the biggest miracle was, is that you have a handful of Jews. Now, Jews, you're talking about the Greeks who are very into their body, very into the physical shape, and they've been practicing, and they're, if you're going to the Greek army, it's not like, you've practiced for the Greek army. Then you have these rabbis that they're going to start a fight with that. If you think about it, and they won at the end, and we'll soon see, how their tactics was. But it's crazy when you think about it. If you think about it, just imagine a group of rabbis from Brooklyn are coming together and be like, oh, we're going to go against America. And are you crazy? They're like, no, we're going to take America. We don't nothing against America. Whoever's listening online, I'm just using it as an example. But that's what it was. The strongest superpower in the world, Greece. Then you had a bunch of rabbis that are coming together and be like, let's fight against them. And be like, and everyone was like, yeah. Were they delusional? What was going on? It makes absolutely no sense. So I want to pause. This is the beginning. This is where the beginning of the rebellion of the Jews began. Now I want to pause that for a moment, and I want to speak about the Jewish woman that influenced into the story of Chanukah. You hear the story of Chanukah. Some people are familiar with that, but actually Jewish women play a very, very important role throughout history. You look at Sarah Imenu. She had Avraham, and she had her son Yitzchak. She was the one who forced Ishmael to leave. You know what would have happened if, let's say, Avraham wanted them to stay? And who knows how much Ishmael would have influenced Yitzchak. She forced it. Then you have the next generation, Yivka and Yitzchak. Rivka tells Yaakov and says, go get the brachot for Esav. And who knows what would have happened if Esav got the brachot. Then you have also, afterwards, you have in
Esav got it, we would have been poor and we wouldn't be able to stand the chance. That's what they
Yeah, if Esav, it could have been done. And she would, and who's the thing for? For the woman, for Rivka, for the mother. You look at the time of, when we were in Egypt, the father and the mother of Moshe Rabbeinu, they separated. They weren't together, and because they said, what's the point of having children? Because if we're going to have children, they're just going to be thrown into the ocean. So Miriam, their daughter, goes and because of that, by the way, everybody separated from their wives. Because they said, if the tzaddik of the generation, there's no point to have children, so let's not stop having children. And they all separated, they all divorced their wives. And Miriam, a little girl, goes over and says, listen, you're killing the girls and the boys. Paro is only killing the boys. He was only throwing, who was he throwing to the water? Only the boys. But now with your decree, also the girls are going. So they decided that she was right, and they got back together, and from her that came Moshe Rabbeinu. So because of Miriam, also came the Moshe Rabbeinu, which was the savior for the Jewish people in Egypt.
I think she said that when she was 7.
She was very young.
Wow.
Yeah, she was very young. The bigger thing is that the parents listened to the little girl.
Yeah.
It's like who you told it to me, but you have righteous people. They just want to do the right thing. Doesn't matter who tells it to them. Then we even go to the story of the golden calf. The story of the golden calf. It was, the men wanted to do it. The woman didn't want to be involved in it. The men actually ripped the jewelry off the woman's ears and the nose and the bracelets to throw it. The woman didn't want to be a part of it. So you also have the story of Purim, Haman, Achashverosh. Who was the savior? Esther. So you have constantly the woman. Who are the women in the story of Chanukah? So first of all, the not so famous story is of the story of the Maccabees, the Hashmonaim sister. What happened was, this is also possible where the rebellion started. There was a rule that when under the Antiochus, if you wanted to get married, no problem, you could get married, but they didn't allow mikveh, they didn't allow anything else. But the first thing that you need to do before the chuppah, the Greek general has to be intimately with the bride. So there's never a virgin that's going into the chuppah. So and it was just happened. This was a common thing that happened to the Jews. So the sister of the Hashmonaim were getting married, and people were just waiting over there, and the governor to actually come. And the sister's looking at her brothers, and she rips her gown, and she says, "You're going to just stand there. You're not going to defend my honor. You're going to let this governor go and take it." And she started giving them a whole speech, and they were like, "No, you know what? You're right." And they started standing up, and from that they started standing the rebellion. So some say that from her actually started the whole rebellion against the Greeks. There's also a very, very famous story with Hannah and her 7 sons. This is a very famous story where they used to force the Jews to serve idols. So what happened was that Hannah had seven boys, and she went. They brought the 7 boys in front of the king or the governor, and they put a place an idol. Some say it was an idol. Some say they had to eat non-kosher or whatever, a pig. But let's use the example of the idol. They put an idol in front of them, and they call the oldest boy up. And they say, bow down to the idol. So the boy says, not going to do it. So they're like, if you're not going to bow down to the idol, we're going to kill you. And you're like, you can kill me, I'm not doing it. And you're like, think about it. Your mother, your brothers, bow down so you don't get killed. And he says, do whatever you want. And they went and they brutally murdered him, dismembered him brutally in front of the mother and the six other sons. After that, it wasn't that he took a break. They called the second son over. And he says, now you bow down. And the second son says, you can do to me what you did to my brother. He says, I'm going to be just as strong as he was. And they were like, are you a fool? Are you an idiot? And they said, come on, go and bow down to it. And he's like, it's not going to happen. And they went, and again, they brutally murdered this one in front of the other remaining 5 brothers and the mother. And one by one, they called up the sons, and they said, bow down. And they said, we're not doing it. No matter how much they tried to convince them, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't serve Avodah Zarah. One of the things that you're not allowed to do, you have to, if somebody forces you to do Avodah Zarah, you have to give your life up. It's one of the...
In public or?
In public or in private. Yeah, there's other things regarding that, even private, there's other things that you might have to give it up. Not the scope of today, but this, yeah. So they went one by one, and the mother saw all her children. They forced everybody to watch. Disgusting, the barbarism. And they went over this youngest child, who saw all his older 6 brothers getting brutally murdered. And they go, I think it was maybe about 7 years old. And they call him up, and they say, don't be a fool like your brothers. You still have the whole life ahead. And the king promises, I promise you riches. You're going to be the richest man. I'm going to give you everything. Just bow down. Because it doesn't look good for him. He's trying to get in. No one is listening. So he offered him anything. And the kid says, I'm not doing it. And he's like, okay. He's like, all right. You don't have to bow down. He said, I'm going to put a ring. My ring is going to drop in front of the idol. All you got to do is pick it up and give it to me. You're not bowing down. People are going to think you bowed, but you're not serving the idol. And the kid said, I'm not doing it. I'm not picking up your ring. And they put it, and the king dropped it. He says, pick it up. And the kid's like, I'm not doing it. And so the king calls over Hannah, the mother, and says, listen, this is your last son. He says, speak some sense into him so you don't lose everything. So she calls over to him. She's like crying already from the morning of her, and she goes over to her son, and she says, he says, you hold strong. He says, I nursed you. He says, I fed you. I brought you to this world. And he says, you do exactly what your brothers did. You are doing the right thing. And he says, but when you get up to Shemaim, I want you to go to Avraham Avinu and tell him, he says, you placed 1 child on the altar. I put 7 on the altar. And she's let the child go. And the child went, and he says it's not going to happen. And they murdered the child in front of the mother. And shortly afterwards, the mother passed away. It's a very famous story of Chanukah. There's another famous story that is associated with Chanukah, but it is questionable if it happened during the Chanukah time or not. This is the story of Yehudis. Yehudis, there was the Greek general Holofernes was put a siege around Jerusalem, and no food, no water, no nothing was going in or out, and the Jews were losing supplies, and it was getting very very bad for them. So there was a widow, an extremely beautiful widow, very wealthy, by the name of Yehudis. And Yehudis went and she said, "Let me see if I can do anything." She took her maid, she packed up some food, she put makeup, and she beautified herself. And she went and she walked outside the gates, and the officers, from when she walked right into the Greek army, and they looked at her and see this woman over here. First of all, they were spellbound by her beauty, and they were like, "Who are you?" Well, so she's like, "I'm a Jew, and I've came to give news to the Greek general. I'm going to give him, as long as he just spares me, I am going to tell him how to conquer Jerusalem." So they were spellbound by her beauty. They said, yeah, and they brought her in front of the general. So she started telling the general, all these things, how you're going to get in, all the things that he knew already. But he was so overtaken by her beauty, he started, his mind was working. How is he going to seduce her? So then she says, listen, I'm a very righteous woman. I speak constantly with God. And the Jews right now are in they're running out of kosher food. Soon they are going to start having to eat non-kosher food. When they do that, you will know that you'll be able to capture them without a problem. And what?
Why is she telling them that?
Oh, so you'll soon see her plan. So the governor says, okay, fine, you're welcome. They set her up her tent, and she stays there. When midnight comes, she calls for the governor, and she asks permission to go to the lake to pray. She says, at midnight, I pray, and that's when God's going to tell me, where the Jews are holding. So he says, fine, no problem, and they granted her access. So her and her maid would go to the river and pray at midnight. Now this went on for 3 nights, and for 3 nights, the generals, they saw it, they knew that, it wasn't uncommon to see just this Jewish woman walking through the barracks, whatever you want to call that over there, and going to the river, praying, and then coming back. And the 4th night, the governor made a party, a very intimate party, like no generals, like just close acquaintances. And he invited Yehudis. He says, listen, this is his chance. And he invited her to the party. There was a lot of wine, a lot of stuff. And she said, surprisingly, she said, yeah, I'll come. But she brought her own food. So she ate from her own food, and meanwhile, everybody's drinking, everyone's eating, it's a very merry party, and slowly, one by one, people leave. And as people leave, it's slowly becoming, at the end, it was just her and this general. And meanwhile, she feeds the general more wine, and he passes out. He's on the bed, and he's like completely passed out. So she goes and she takes out a sword, she offers a prayer to God, and with 2 hits, she severs his head. She takes his head and she puts it in her bag where she brought her food, and she walked out. And she collected, she got her maid, and she went to Jerusalem. She went right back to Jerusalem. Now they didn't think of anything, because they always saw her walking in there. She went to Jerusalem and she saw them that she got the head, and then they put the head. I believe this. They put the head on on the Jerusalem wall, and on the walls. So when the army woke up in the morning, they saw the governor over there. They completely went crazy. How was that? And they just ran. They just all booked. They ran. They weren't sure what happened, and so she saved also the town at that time. So those are three stories about how women came into the story of Chanukah. Now it's interesting how the battles were fought, because you're looking at, you have 5 the Maccabees, the Hashmonaim, I'm sorry, where they're rabbis, and they collected a group. How were they able to fight against the Greek army? So originally everything that they did, the Hashmonaim, they did according to the Torah halakha. Which means is that if they got some people. I think they got in the beginning a few hundred. That's what they fought with, a few hundred versus that. But then they said, okay, is anybody scared to fight? They send them right home. That's one of the laws of war, is that if you're scared to fight in war, you don't stay in war. You go home. And also, if you just got married, you go home. If you just build a home, you go home. If you just build a vineyard, planted a vineyard, you go home. Everything was according to halakha. And not only that, they used to fast before they went to war. They prayed and fast. Who would go to war hungry? But they knew that their power doesn't come with them. They had complete trust and faith in Hashem. Now, now when they were thinking, so they were brilliant people. So their battle strategies was very brilliant. They said, okay, look at the Greeks. The Greeks, they are very well trained. You're talking about, they have the Greek, think of it as like missiles and tanks in those days. They had elephants, they had this battling rams, they had these ballistas which would throw very heavy stones at a very strong distance, and they had all these equipment that the Maccabees didn't have. So they said, okay, where are they trained? They're trained to fight in the day. We're going to attack them in the night. He says, and not only that, we're going to attack them when the sun is setting from our end. They planned everything to go the opposite of the way they can do it. Additionally, the way that the Greeks trained is that they had they had a group of soldiers. You had let's say 10 in the front, and then 50 behind them. And 10 and then 50 behind them. The first group would have the spears facing forward. The other groups, the people behind them, would have it forward. If the first fell, the next one came up. So this is very good when you're fighting head on. So the Maccabees said, okay, no, the Hashmonaim said, we're going to fight from the back. We're going to give them a surprise from the back. So they used they were used to their own, they were in the mountains. So they used the guerrilla warfare. They came, they ran, they fought, they ran back. So they were extremely, extremely successful. One after another, every battle that they fought, they won. And
what was the size of the Jewish army?
If in the beginning, a few hundred. Then maybe at the end, because what happened was, as the Jews were like, okay, they're actually winning. So they were like, more Jews started joining. And more than that, it was until this time many Jews were more towards the Greek way, so the Hellenistic way. And now they're like, okay, there's something going on over here. So everyone likes to be in the winning team. So they started fighting for the army grew. I would say probably grew. I don't have the numbers, but probably a few thousand. A joke still compared to what the Greek had. The Greek had armies, and it's ridiculous. You think about it. This is the biggest miracle. Not the lighting of the menorah that it lit for another 7 days. The miracle was that you have a small army like this destroy the biggest superpower in the world. And the war actually went on for 3 years. And every time that they won the wars, they also took the spoils of the war. Now, but the difference is that these righteous people, the righteous fighters, they didn't keep the spoils for themselves. They actually gave it to the widows, the orphans, to the poor people. They actually just kept the knights and the shields and all those things. So for 3 years, they fought this battle. And one after another, they kept on defeating the Greeks, until they finally, the Maccabees, they just took over. They took over the Hashmonaim, they took over the entire operation in Judea. At this point in time, Mattatyahu Kohen Gadol already passed away, and Yehuda Maccabee, that's when he upped the game completely. He was a complete military man. He, like, whatever his father did, he just completely went above and beyond. A brilliant mind. So when they completely defeated the Greek, they went into the Bet HaMikdash, and they saw at this point in time already the Bet HaMikdash was taken over completely by the Greeks. Completely, they offered pigs on the side. They offered altars. There were idol worship going on in the Greek, and they saw what was going on in the Bet HaMikdash, that they completely broke down. They tore their clothes. They put on ashes on their head, and they sat basically mourning for the Bet HaMikdash. And they went to clean the entire place up. And then they looked for kosher oil to light. And this is very interesting because they didn't need kosher oil to light. They could have light with anything, but they wanted particularly this kosher oil. They were like, these righteous people that we've been impure for so long, so many years we've been under the Greek influence, just give us something. They just wanted something completely pure. There's a certain time, you just want to be everything kosher, and there's such a closeness for it. And then they found one jar. And they had this idea now. So we could either light the menorah for one night, or we could light the menorah for 7 nights of non-kosher oil. But they wanted so much to do the right thing. They wanted so much to just be pure to God. They're like, no, we can't. And they went and they lit with this pure oil. The miracle was, and this is the time also, is that even though the Hashmonaim saw that the Hashmonaim saw that God was on their side, because they won the war. It's obvious that God was on their side. It was improbable, unrealistic that they won the war. So they saw that it happened, but still they were like, is God really happy with us? Are we doing the right thing? And when they saw that the lights lit for 7 days, because the miracle was really for 7 days, so it lit for completely 8 days. They saw that God is really with them. That was the miracle that they were seeking for, the miracle of the menorah. There was a sign that the Shekhinah, the God, came back to them, that they accepted their tshuva. Now, what happened is slowly, all the Hellenistic Jews came back to Judaism. They came back. Some actually stayed and they went to, but they were done with. But the Jews came back. So the Hashmonaim went and they actually took over. They brought literally the Torah back to the Jews. At this time, it was completely dead, and they rejuvenated everything. And after that, it also says that Antiochus, he suffered a very hard death. And it's written also in Josephus, that he said also that one of the reasons that he had such a hard death is because of what he did for the Jews. He had suffered like a terrible, suffering that he went through his death. But you look at it, and now there's a few questions that we have to answer. Is number one, why don't we have the book of the Hashmonaim? It's written, the Maccabees 1 and 2. It's written. Why don't we have it? Why is it not part of Tanakh? And the answer is that the entire Tanakh, you look at the 24 books of Tanakh, were all written with prophecy. Every one of them are written with prophecy. And prophecy ended before the Chanukah story. So which means is that the Chanukah came after the prophecy, and it didn't make it into the book. In fact, the Hashmonaim 1 and 2, you don't even see it in bookstores. It's very hard to actually get a hold of them. You have to actually, some books have it, quoted. But it's referred to as Sifrei Chitzoniyot. It's outside sourced books. And it's also very interesting is when you think about it now, the secular Jews, they go after Chanukah is a very, very popular thing, and you're like, the secular Jews are the ones that lost over here. It was a civil war going on in Chanukah. There was a secular Jews versus the religious Jews. And the religious Jews won, and that's what we're celebrating. We're celebrating the fact that we got the Torah back, that we don't have the Erev Rav, we didn't have this influence in that. And then what you have, it's so funny that you have this is the thing, when people are ignorant, they don't know what they're celebrating. They turn on the light every another night, they light another menorah. So, but you think about it, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous of what what happened. But still, another reason why we don't have it written down is the Hashmonaim, they did something that they shouldn't have done. And that is, they became kings. They put themselves as king. And they were Kohen Gadol and kings. And that should be two separate things. And because of that, they ruled for about 100 years. And from them came the downfall of the second Bet HaMikdash. Because there were two brothers by the name of Hyrcanus and Asterbolus, who were fighting for throne, both Kohanim. And they invited the Roman general Pompey to settle it. So this Roman general, they basically invited Rome again into Jerusalem, and that's when everything started happening and everything started going as a downfall. But you look at the story of Chanukah, why I feel this is so important is that what were the Jews doing? The Jews were going for materialism. They were going for the secular. They were going for, let's be like the non-Jews. Let's assimilate. Let's be together. And unfortunately, there are many people nowadays that we're going in the same path. You look at Israel. Unbelievable. Israel, you know how many liberal Jews you have in Israel that they want nothing more but the Arabs and Jews to pray together and go and learn together about Jewish history. Look at you, fool! They want to kill you. Their cartoons for little kids literally says, "Kill the Jews." They have games. I don't know if you've seen it. They have games I don't know the place. I don't know how advanced they are, but the games are. You know how you have to beat the robbers. You see Hasidic Jews, and they have to stab the Hasidic Jews. And they have cartoons where you have these cartoons everything's all nice. And then you see a suicide bomber blowing up a bunch of Jews, and then he's going flying up with angels. I don't think they show the 72 virgins, but they train these, and these liberal Jews are like, no, come, we're all the same. Let's be all together, and we're going in the same way. The government is very liberal. The government is not pro the religious world. It's pro the opposite world. We're going in the same way that went in Chanukah, and we have to wake up. We have to realize this is not the way that it's supposed to be. The way that it was, you had the secular Jews and the religious Jews. Secular Jews always going for the materialism, always going for just constantly just building, forgetting everything about religion, trying to act as much non-Jew as they possibly can. Reverse the circumcision nowadays is not as crazy because people don't go in the nude, but many Jews hide that they're Jewish. And I had a guy, I don't understand why. His name was Chaim. I used to work with him. And so, it's very common that you take non-Jewish names because, go tell a Christian to say Chaim. They'll cough up phlegm and I can't do it. So he said, okay, fine. So he changed his name. He changed his name, and when I heard his name, I'm like, you gotta be. He changed it to Chris.
No.
I'm like, Charles, Chuck. I could name you 16 different CH things. Chris out of all of them? I don't know. But why do you want to be like them? It's something that we're different. We are different than the non-Jews. We're very different than the non-Jews. The idea is the story of Chanukah is to learn from it, to realize, to be proud to be Jewish. We are proud that we are religious. We stand up for what we believe. We stand up for the Torah. We stand up for the Chachamim. We stand up for the thing. And Baruch Hashem, we live in a community, Baruch Hashem, that does that. And hopefully with this, we'll be able to spread it out and give it more to the entire world like we should. Any questions? I think it's fascinating, this story. No, isn't this crazy, this story?
I thought you would have more.
I actually skipped a lot of stuff, but
you finished so quickly.
I know, because I skipped a lot of stuff, but.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that Chanukah isn't recorded because there's no prophecy, but they say nowadays whatever's happening now is being recorded. But we
No.
It wasn't in the Tanakh.
Well, it's not put in the Tanakh.
Okay.
So it is recorded.
But what's happening now is going to be written in the Torah.
What do you mean? What's happening now?
Like this generation is going to be written in the Torah.
Which Torah?
Like Dor Mashiach, she's saying.
Yeah.
Then when Mashiach comes, that's a whole different ball game what we're talking about there. But until Mashiach comes, everything is as we have it now. In fact, there are hints to Chanukah in the Torah.
Yeah.
It's in Vayikra, Leviticus, what's chapter maybe 24. I have to look it up. It speaks about the holidays in order. And then it says right after Sukkot, it speaks about lighting a menorah. Which you're like, why does that have to do there? And the answer is because right after Sukkot comes Chanukah.
Is there any reference to the Purim also?
I'm sure there is.
In that section?
There is a reference of Purim. I don't remember where.
I'm wondering because if it's saying all the holidays in in order of the calendar.
I think Purim also. I think it's there somehow.
Something about the paro, and it wasn't that specific paro. That paro comes in later on, and
it's all in there. It's all there hidden. It's actually really, really crazy because there's Purim is hidden in the Torah also. In Purim, in the Megillah, I think there's 12,156 words or letters, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
something like that.
About that, yeah.
And in equal mathematical skip, you have the name Mordechai and Esther with 12 in the Torah. with in the equal mathematical of 12,156 letters or words. Exactly the numeric. I have to look it up, the exact numbers, but it's like crazy. Like you can't make this stuff up. I know one guy who became religious because of all these mathematical codes.
Oh,
That's how he became. That's how he became religious.
Tell him about Rabbi Mansour. He'd love him.
Yeah, oh, he knows about it. I don't answer.
Rabbi Mansour is all
Yeah.
into the gematria.
Yeah. But if we have a few minutes, I would like to. I'll tell you what with this conversion. Let me pause this. This probably should not be in the.